Hey guys, it's Mr. Hampton. I'm doing a video for my ACE language students on formalist criticism, which is also known as language analysis. Feel free to pause the video at any time if you need some additional time to write down notes. If you're viewing this video and you're not in my ACE language class, keep in mind that most of the stuff that I'm going to go over is specifically for ACE language, but a lot of it is definitely applicable to any other courses that you're doing formalist criticism for. One of the things that we're definitely going to go over in this video is the differences between denotation and connotation. We're going to talk briefly about descriptive and figurative language and tone and mood, and then I'm going to go over steps for actual doing language analysis on your paper. And the last thing that we'll do is we'll take a look at what formalist criticism looks like on a story called Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell. I'm going to do my best to try to get this in one shot for recording, but if there's weird skips or pauses and I have to keep going in and out, I apologize in advance. Okay, first thing that we're going to talk about is a mantra that I sort of have that I go over with my students about what formalist criticism is. The first is it's not what we say, it's how we say it. The other one is, do words have secrets? I think at the end of this presentation you'll come to discover that words do have secret meanings. Not all words, keep in mind, but most of them I think can definitely have little secrets that they're hiding. And that's really what formalist criticism is all about those words and phrases that mean more than they first appear. One of the first things that we're going to talk about is the differences between denotation and connotation, because it's important to definitely know the difference between them when doing formalist criticism. Denotation specifically means what a word literally means. If you take a word like gun, for example, gun literally means a mechanical contraption that fires bullets. Connotation, on the other hand, is what a word suggests or implies. And again, if we're going to use that example of a gun can imply violence, or it can imply aggression. It can also imply peacekeeping if you're talking about a law enforcement officer. So there's what a word literally means, but then it's also what does the word maybe imply or suggest to you personally. And that's really what formalist criticism is all about, is that connotative meaning. Another thing that I like to look at with my students at first, before we get into actual stories about denotation and connotation, is have them look at magazine advertisements. If you look at a typical magazine advertisement, there's the denotative meaning of it, which is what the actual image is of. And it's basically just a list. So for example, this one for a non-alcoholic beer, I said it's a young woman that I see. You know, she's wearing a bikini-style outfit. I can obviously see that she's pregnant, and she's holding a non-alcoholic beer. But your brain is pretty clever. It takes literally what you see, that denotative meaning, and without really knowing it, your brain starts to deconstruct the image and put it into connotative terms. And again, connotation is maybe what the image suggests. So this one, for example, with the young woman who's pregnant holding a non-alcoholic beer, I said that for connotation, she's wearing a bikini-style outfit. Maybe it suggests that she's proud of her body, and she's young and that she's youthful, so she's enjoying it. Now, this is the key point. She's holding both the beer and her belly with her two hands, and this suggests to the viewer that she can have both at the same time. Because it's non-alcoholic, it's not going to maybe damage her baby that's inside. So without you knowing it, your brain has done this, but with formalist criticism, you really have to hammer through it, and you have to figure out what does the word say, and then maybe what does it imply or suggest. Okay, to link this to an actual story, if we take a look at George Orwell's Shooting an Elephant, and just like the title suggests, George Orwell is going to debate in this whether or not he needs to shoot an elephant. I just picked out a random line from it to show you how denotative meaning and connotative meaning could work. The line is, the crowd was going to have their bit of fun after all. The rifle was a beautiful German thing with crosshair sights. Denotatively, that's what the words literally mean. He has a rifle, and he's debating whether or not to shoot. That's true, but he says that it's from Germany. So we could say denotatively that the rifle was manufactured in Germany. That's all denotative meaning can tell us. Connotative meaning, though, is where formalist criticism comes in. What could it imply, suggest, or evoke? Germany here, if you knew nothing about the author or the origin of the story, you could say that Germany maybe could suggest power, war, military supremacy, Nazism. And one of the funny things about formalist criticism is that we often ignore any biographical information or historical information about the story in favor of just analyzing the text itself. So even if this story was written before the rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazism, by our own records and by our own modern times, we could perhaps say that, yes, maybe it has something to do with Nazism, maybe it could suggest power or war. That's okay, because we throw those things away when doing formalist criticism. The next thing that inevitably comes up is two questions. The first of which my students usually ask me is, does every word or phrase can really contain a secret meaning? To be completely honest, probably not. But keep in mind, it depends on what you're geared for, and it depends on what you personally are interested in. Every word could potentially have a secret meaning to it. Some secret meanings may be worth more on paper than others. The other question that inevitably comes up is, what kinds of words or phrases should I be watching for? I usually have them write down this list. Keep in mind, you're not going to pay attention to all these things at once. Instead, you're probably going to notice patterns that an author has. So to give you an example, if I'm reading along and then I notice that the author really likes to use metaphors, then maybe I'm going to gear myself toward recognizing more of those metaphors. Similarly, if they use lots of personification or lots of hyperbole, those are just patterns that I'll notice as I progress through reading it. So the first two things, easiest sources that you can find, nouns and verbs. Nouns, person, place, or thing, and then verbs are those action words. So look at how the author describes certain actions, or what kinds of nouns they use to describe people, places, or things. The next two are adverbs and adjectives. Adverbs modify verbs, and adjectives modify everything else. So if a character is walking down the street, how is he walking? Is he walking slowly? Is he walking quickly? Those are things that you probably want to notice as you read along. The next two, usually from poetry, but authors like to use these as well in short stories, use of metaphors and similes. Similes uses like or as, metaphor does not. Next two, personification and hyperbole. Personification is when we give a non-human object living traits. To give you an example, the grass danced in the breeze. Grass doesn't dance, so it's considered personification. And again, like I said before, if an author tends to use personification once, typically they'll use it repeatedly again and again. And hyperbole is an exaggeration. Allusions tend to be a rich source as well. If you were to say, her garden was like Eden, the biblical allusion right there, you could talk a lot about maybe what the effect of using that allusion is. For speeches specifically, I have my students look at restatement, repetition, and then rhetorical questions. And for my students, you can check your notes for those three things. And in addition, anything else that seems to affect the tone or mood of the story is great for you to actually focus on. After that, my students usually hit me with, okay, well now what? Just because I know it's a metaphor or a simile, what does that mean? What does that prove? One of the things I like to talk about is this. Writing down that this, insert the blank, is a metaphor, or that this is an allusion to something, it's absolutely meaningless. What is meaningful is if you write down how that use of the metaphor or allusion affects the story, or maybe affects you. Let me give you some examples. This is what I would consider to be a meaningless phrase, and on Ace Language this will not earn any points. The author describes the rifle as a beautiful German thing. This is an adjective that describes how it's from Germany and it's beautiful. That says absolutely nothing. All this person is doing is retelling me in a different way exactly what the author has already told me. That's not what formalist criticism or language analysis is about. This phrase, on the other hand, is more meaningful to me. The author describes the rifle as a beautiful German thing. The adjective German evokes a sense of war and power, as Germany was known for their prowess in combat. In addition, the author describes the rifle as beautiful, which suggests that he derives great pleasure and satisfaction in his gun. Notice the difference between them. One says absolutely nothing that I don't already know, and the other one kind of tells me what that phrase or what that word suggests or evokes in them, the reader. That pretty much is formalist criticism for you right there. After that, the question I usually get is, and so what? Is there anything else that I need to do? Keep in mind that when words and phrases, if you notice patterns that develop, a lot of metaphors or a lot of personification, that usually points toward a specific effect on the mood or tone of the story. And if you're like me, I usually got those two things confused when I was younger, so I just want to go over really quickly the differences between them. Okay, so the differences between tone and mood are really important for you to understand. Tone is the author's attitude toward the subject they're writing about. To give you an example, an author can be playful, sarcastic, condescending, serious, sad. Authors have unique tones depending on what subject they're writing about. Mood, on the other hand, is specifically for the reader, how the reader feels about that subject. To give you an example, if I read something that's, let's say, sarcastic, I can find it to be a happy story. Or maybe if it's a serious tone, I can find it to be suspenseful at the same time. Scary, mysterious, etc. You have to know that very rarely are tone and mood going to be the same thing in a story. And in fact, 95% of the time, they're going to be separate issues. And the last thing is going to be steps for language analysis. How to take what you have on the story itself and then how to write an analysis on that. The first step in the process, if applicable, you definitely want to read the prompt header, which is going to tell you a brief summary about what the story is that you're about to read. ACE language kids, this is definitely going to be something that you're going to want to do. In addition to that, while you're reading that prompt header, try to guess at what does this header possibly tell me about a tone or mood of the story. If I'm reading the prompt header, is the story probably going to be serious? Is it probably going to be sad? Those little subtle clues will help you as you actually read the story. Step 2 in the process, you want to read the story completely. And while you're reading, you want to highlight or circle or underline words and phrases that seem to pique your interest. It's a precaution to say that you're probably not going to highlight or underline enough, but remember, you want to highlight as much as you can at this point because you can always go back and then slim that list down. So don't feel like you are going to highlight or underline too much. Step 3 in the process, you want to pick out those best words and phrases from those that you highlighted or underlined. At this point, you want to try to notice those patterns that are developing and specifically how they're affecting the tone, how the author is perceived, and then also the mood of the story, how it's making you, the reader, feel. Last step in the process is to write your analysis, and for ACE language, you're going to need 13 to 15 comments for that A-band. You're going to want to start with a thesis statement, which we'll go over with shooting an elephant in just a second. And the last thing is you want to explain as much as you can how the author uses this word or phrase to suggest or evoke or imply this. And it's just a repetitious cycle of doing that over and over again until you've said enough. Okay, the last step in the process is going to be to take out shooting an elephant, which I'll do on screen in just a moment. For those ACE language students, you'll find it back in Unit 1, pages 10 through 11. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and back out of it, and I will load the story. Okay, and here it is right here. Remember, first step in the process, if applicable, you definitely want to read that header information to try to guess at a maybe tone or mood of the story. And then as you read it, that definition might change, but still it might just help you just a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to start reading right here. It says, the passage below describes the writer's experience in Burma when he was serving as a police officer at a time when the British ruled the country. He has been ordered to deal with a possible threat posed by an elephant. And I'm just going to use my little comment boxes off to the side. Right here, where it says, oh, he's been ordered to deal with a possible threat posed by an elephant. Off to the side, just off the top of my head, probably shock or awe, I would guess, and maybe how that is how the author will feel about dealing with the elephant. So as I read it, maybe I'll look for emotional words to sort of tell me what he's thinking as he deals with this elephant. Okay, if you haven't already, go ahead and read the Shooting an Elephant that I've included in the link or in your Hampton binder. You can hit the pause button. When you're done, I'll pop the screen back up and I'll show you what kinds of comments that I came up with and then how to take those comments into an actual composition itself. Okay, now that we're back, I wanted to show you what words or phrases that I underlined as I read along. If you didn't pick out these words or phrases, that's okay, because everybody notices something different about the text. Just because everybody recognized metaphors and you didn't see any metaphors, let's say you picked out imagery instead, that's okay. To each his own, as they say. Myself, I just want to go through what exactly I picked out. The first thing that I definitely noticed is in the beginning sort of hesitation about not wanting to kill the elephant. That's later backed up by all the different ways that he describes the elephant. One of my favorite phrases would be a preoccupied grandmotherly air. The choice of grandmother here definitely suggests a lot more than just oh, it's an older figure. I mean, it's almost like family. So shooting the elephant would be like shooting his own grandmother. I noticed an interesting contrast here between when he says that he has to act quickly, and then he also says he had to turn to those experienced-looking Burmans to help him out. Keep in mind, quickly here suggests that he has to do things very, very hastily, and he doesn't really have a whole lot of experience shooting an elephant, so he has to turn to those experienced-looking Burmans. One of the other things that I picked out toward the bottom, when coming up against the elephant, he says that he has as much chance as a toad under a steamroller. That's a very interesting simile, and it definitely shows the size comparison that we have between himself and the elephant, as well as the chance that he has of coming out of it alive. After that, he actually mentions how he'll be like a grinning corpse at the end if the elephant runs into him. I think grinning here is a pretty interesting word choice. I think it suggests that maybe he'll be happy when he dies because he'll be grinning. Continuing along, again we have this hasty use of vocabulary right here that he shoved the cartridges in. Later on he talks about people wanting to see a theater curtain go up when he confronts the elephant. I think that maybe suggests or implies that there's a show that he's putting on, like he's an actor in a play for people to watch and enjoy. Part of the example I gave you in the PowerPoint was talking about the rifle, a beautiful German thing. Later on, he mentions a devilish roar of glee that went up from the crowd. I think it's very interesting to describe the crowd as devilish, sort of maybe hatred against foreigners. That's definitely a possibility there. Going on, I really like the repetition of this S sound that I noticed as he shot the elephant. He looked suddenly stricken and shrunken, immensely old. And then later on, he sagged flabbily to his knees. His mouth slobbered, and enormous senility seemed to have settled upon him. Sort of a repeated S sound, like he's almost, the elephant's almost just going down very, very gently, and with that S sound, like tss. Continuing along toward the end, he talks about the thick blood welled out of him like red velvet. Very, very specific red color. I like that as a description. And the last thing I noticed was how the tortured gasp continued as steadily as the ticking of a clock. Ticking of a clock in time is always something that's interesting to add. Okay, so the next step in the process, and the last step, would be to take these comments that I have off to the side and then write my commentary based on what I saw. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and then when I come back, I'll show you just a sample of what it would look like. Okay, and last step in the process we're going to talk about is how to actually take those comments that you have and make a composition based on them. Just two quick things that I always tell my students, two things you definitely want to do in your paper. If you do both of these things, you'll at least achieve a passing score on the ACE language exam. The first thing you want to do is you want to start off your paper with a thesis statement. A very simple formula. The author does this because, and I'll show you how that looks in just a second. The second thing you want to do is explain as much as you can those words or phrases and how they affect the text tone or they affect your mood. For shooting an elephant, I'm going to scroll down. I'll show you what I did for my thesis statement. I said that in this passage, the author uses very specific diction to set an overall tone of uncertainty over killing the elephant. For ACE language, you don't get any points for these thesis statements because you haven't described anything specifically about the author's word choice, about the connotative meanings of words. You only get points for doing that after the thesis statement, so just keep that in mind. Okay, after the thesis statement, I'll scroll and I'll just show you what I did on this one. Okay. In the first paragraph, the narrator mentions the elephant having a preoccupied grandmotherly air, which suggests a touch of humanity for the elephant, separating it from just being another animal and instead placing it in the narrator's family tree as a related member. For ACE language, this would count as a point because I talked about the word or phrase and then what it suggests. And whenever you do that, if you follow that formula, the author says this and it means that, you'll get a check mark for those things. Again, you can also use the same phrase and describe it in a different way and still get an additional point for that. So, continuing on, using grandmother also suggests a gentile senility in the elephant and not a terrifying force of destruction. Later on, the narrator uses the adjective experience-looking to describe the Burman people. I believe this suggests that while the Burmans have experience in dealing with the elephant, the narrator does not possess this level of expertise and thus is at a loss as to how to handle the situation. Second paragraph. In paragraph 2, the author introduces a simile when he hypothesizes running into the elephant. I should have about as much chance as a toad under a steamroller. The narrator uses this diction on purpose, setting out to explain the sizable difference between the narrator and the elephant. If he does get trampled, the steamroller of an elephant will not even be phased. The choice of these two objects is of note as well. The toad is a living object capable of dying, whereas the steamroller is a machine capable of breaking down but not dying in the traditional sense. This perhaps suggests that the narrator won't be able to kill the elephant, but will only be able to make it break down. And what I just went over, this is formalist criticism, this is language analysis. It's a pretty simple formula as long as you can get your head around the idea that words do carry secret meanings, and that it's not just what we say, but then also the words we use to describe it. Guys, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to hit me at the bottom. I'll respond back as well as I can. Thanks for taking the time to view this video. ACE Language guys, best of luck studying for your exam. And if you're not taking the ACE Language exam, thanks for viewing, and best of luck with formalist criticism.